Hi, my name's Jason, and I am a parent, and I'm also a musician, and I'm going to talk about buying a guitar for your kid. Feel free to use the index to jump around and find the information that's most applicable. I'm not trying to sell you anything here, except maybe my original music. And I've written songs from the parent's perspective, and I've also written kids' music, which is not annoying. There are links in the description below for that. Okay, so before I talk about instruments at all, I want to talk about the big goal here. Are we just trying to learn a specific song and sort of do something constructive with our time? Or are we really trying to start this journey that we want to become a musician? So I think these are very different types of goals. One is sort of a rote learning type approach, and the other is a how do you encourage and develop creativity? Everything I'm going to talk about here is more applicable to being a pop musician, which is what I am. And by pop, I mean folk, country, blues, rock, because the fundamental difference between classical and jazz and these more, I'm calling them pop genres, is how musicians approach the creation of that music. Pop is a lot more instinct-based. It doesn't necessarily use the same level of fundamental skills and knowledge. You can get started making pop music much faster. For that reason, the way you would approach learning and becoming a pop musician is very different. It is not just lessons, and then someday you're there. I think the lessons are great and they teach skills, but I think it also needs to be done in parallel with let's just make music. So I said I was going to talk about some of the alternatives, but clicked on this because it said guitar probably. So let's talk about guitars first. I think a guitar can be a great instrument for the right age of kid, which is basically teenager and up. Whether you're looking at electric or acoustic, I strongly recommend that people look at used guitars and the best quality used guitar they can afford. A good quality used instrument holds its value very well, so you can always resell it later and get most of your money back. I'm going to stop talking about that because I did a whole video on that question, which I'll link. If you go acoustic, it's a standalone instrument. It just kind of does its thing. You buy the best acoustic that you can afford. There's not a lot of complications there. Electrics are much more complicated because there's really a chain here. There's an electric guitar, and then there's an amplifier, potentially a bunch of effects that you need to make the sound that you want to make. I'm going to recommend for a beginner that you actually go towards a computer as your amplifier and all of those effects, because it is way cheaper and easier to download different simulations of the real thing and play with them on a computer as long as you have the guitar in your hands. Now, to connect the guitar and the computer, you do need a proper interface. Adding an interface to the cost of the guitar just might seem like, oh wow, okay, there's more money. But a good interface is actually a lot cheaper than a good amplifier, so you're saving money. If you look up audio interface for guitar, you get lots of information. I'm going to focus just now on an electric guitar. What would you get? And my recommendation is that you stick to one of three basic models. One is a Telecaster, which looks like this. The other is a Les Paul, which looks like this. There's also something called a Stratocaster, which I don't own one, but I got a picture. If I were to narrow it down further, I would suggest a Telecaster, which many people think is the most versatile electric guitar, but you really aren't going to go wrong with any of those three. They can kind of do everything. Okay, so no matter what guitar you're looking at, whether it be an acoustic or an electric, there are issues of playability, which really are covered in more detail in that used guitar video. So again, I'm going to refer you to that section rather than make this video longer. A specific issue that's really important for beginners is string tension. There's actually a wide variety of string gauges which affects the tension. Different gauges are optimized for different playing styles. Most guitars will come with sort of a middle-of-the-road gauge, when I really think beginners should be learning on a light gauge guitar, which requires a minor modification. If you take a guitar that has been set up for a medium gauge and you put a lighter gauge of strings on it, you're going to change the tension, and it is a wooden instrument, and everything's going to flex, and things are going to go out of whack. So if you don't know what you're doing, you do need to have that switch over to a lighter gauge of string be done by someone who knows what they're doing. And that is the number one reason that people wouldn't do it, because they're scared of screwing it up, or they don't want to pay someone the $50 to do it. It's called setting up a guitar. If you go to a reputable guitar store, very often the first setup for a guitar is free, so it may be baked into the price of a new guitar. Even though I recommend used, you can buy a new guitar and immediately set it up to a lighter gauge included in the price. Now, there just happens to be a few guitars that by design have a lower string tension. This is called a Little Martin. This guitar, because it's smaller, has a shorter distance, and it is a lower tension guitar. So there are a few options like that. If you've got a kid that is, say, a young teen, this may be a really good choice. But if you take a standard size guitar and just set it up with lighter gauge strings, I think that that is fine for your 15, 16 and up. Okay, so I want to start talking about the alternatives to just buying a guitar. Should I try bass instead? And I think for the right type of personality, the answer is a resounding yes. Bass gives them a way to participate in the musical structure much quicker because it just reduces the complexity of what they're dealing with. If you've got a kid that really doesn't care about, those kind of musical structure type things, and they just want to make the sound they want to make, well, bass is kind of limiting. So I think you'd be steering towards the guitar again. Bass is very much a patient team player kind of instrument, but everything you learn on a bass absolutely transfers over to a guitar. Bass is a little simpler. You just get the instrument and you don't need a bunch of effects to play the music the way you hear it in a pop song. So I think you can get started and you can get participating and play along with something so much faster with a bass that it can be a great tool of encouragement to get you into it. Now, for a lot of genres of music, I really want to make a strong pitch for a keyboard instead. It is a great fundamental instrument to learn how to be a musician. You can get free software for developing musical arrangements and building songs, and the best tool to input your musical information into that software is a keyboard. There's just superb amounts of creativity you can get into with a keyboard. And now the other great thing about a keyboard is that it's laid out in such an intuitive fashion. It's just from your left hand to your right hand, the pitch of the note gets low to high. There's this repeated pattern of the octaves. It's so easy to place yourself on a scale and just play a keyboard. This section I'm just going to talk about preteens. My number one recommendation again is going to go to a keyboard. There's a great lesson structure developed for young kids. There's a ubiquity of teachers. The one thing I will say about teachers for young kids, exploring the creativity of being a pop musician can happen at a very young age. You play chopsticks, the ding, 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 ding. That song is all about an exercise in rhythm and intervals, but there's really no reason why you can't learn how to play chopsticks and then immediately ask the kid, so how could we change chopsticks? We could play it dun 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 dun. You can play around with things. And I think having a teacher that would encourage that kind of creativity, that's how you're developing a pop musician as opposed to a classical musician. The other thing that might come to mind with a really young kid is a ukulele. So there's a lot of pros to a ukulele if you're ultimately trying to get to guitar, and that is the ukulele standard tuning is very compatible with eventually using all of those skills on a guitar. So if we want to just play the open strings on a ukulele, that is the same thing as playing. So all of the structure that you would learn in terms of understanding the fretboard on a ukulele would transfer over to guitar at a later age, and the ukulele addresses basically all of the issues that you would have with the physical size of a guitar, the string tension. The number one drawback of a ukulele is it only makes ukulele sounds. You're stuck. I think that covers the basics. If there's anything that I've left out, please ask me a question. I'll try to answer it in the comments. The only thing I'm selling here is original music. I've got songs from a parent's perspective, which I think is a woefully underserved market. So links in the description below. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks a lot for listening.